Today we are going to light up the Subaru with an underbody glow kit from LowGlow. So let's get started. In the box you have everything you need. All of your LEDs, your front, rear, and your side. I have two each, so two in the front, two in the sides, two in the rear. You also have all the wiring to wire everything up. Scooby snacks for when you get hungry. We'll eat those for sure. Your controller, which is going to control it from your phone and also connect to your battery and to the LED lights. Instructions, which nobody ever reads anyway. We'll just figure it out as we go. And stickers for extra power.
Before we get started, you want to test everything to make sure all the LED strips are working properly and there are no issues. Imagine getting everything installed to find out it just doesn't work. When I was testing, I made an error in the wiring. You don't want to make this mistake. I start by unwrapping all the lights, taking the controller out of the box, and also just getting all the wiring organized so that way my workspace is clean and easy to find what I need. To get the testing underway, you'll need to connect the wiring to the Bluetooth controller. The red and black wire go on one side and the red, white, and yellow go on the other side. It's clearly marked what input each wire goes into based on the color. The red and black wire have a round terminal connector and they'll connect directly to the battery. Start by disconnecting the negative terminal and then move on to the positive. Be careful taking off these bolts or you'll be like me looking throughout my engine bay trying to find every lost bolt that's fell down there. Red goes to red, black to black. Once connected, you'll tighten them back down in reverse order with the positive first, then the negative. Make sure they're snug tight. For the quick test, I only connected the front lights to make sure power was getting to them. The QR code makes downloading the app quick and easy and setup is just a couple of taps. The device you're searching for will be listed on the instructions. This is where my error comes in, and when I go to switch on the lights, they don't turn on. I assume this was because they weren't all plugged in, so I plugged all the lights in. In hindsight, this doesn't make any sense, but it's still not working. I'm stumped. It's connected properly, but after touching the controller, everything turns on. It seems like the wiring wasn't tightened down snug enough and a wire was loose. So I tightened all the screws on the controller and everything seems to work just fine. This issue comes up again when installing, and that's when I realized the real mistake I made. Before mounting the lights, you'll want to route the switch to an accessible place inside the car, and I chose the driver's side. There's a couple pop clips in the wheel well you'll pop off, and you can pull back the wheel well liner. This gives you access to the wires. If you don't have an STi, it's going to be a little bit different, but likely the same concept. To get the switch into the cabin, there was this white piece that was inside the bottom footwell. There is a bolt that holds it in, and once I pop this out, there is a rubber grommet that is just closing a hole. I popped that out and I was able to slide through the wire trigger, and from there I was able to route it all the way up and place it right below my steering wheel. Now it's time to finally get the LEDs mounted underneath the car. For good adhesion, use rubbing alcohol and thoroughly clean the areas where you will be mounting the lights. You'll want to clean each area multiple times to ensure a good bond with the tape. Now that everything is really clean, mark the center spot of your bumper and install outward. There is directional arrows on the LED strip, and those arrows should be pointing out from the center point to the wheel. I prefer to work in sections, so I only cleaned and installed one side. I repeat the process for the second side. The LED strips are bendable and it's easy to arc the strip around the bumper towards the back. Now the front is installed. Next up is to route the controller wires down through the engine bay and connect the front strip to the Y connector. When routing, make sure they're clear of any electrical or any heat sources. And again, I try to turn them on and make sure all is good and they aren't turning on. I finally realized my mistake. When placing one of the wires into the controller, I didn't put it between the two metal pieces that are clamped by a screw. It somehow was pushed behind. I unscrew it, reposition it, and voila, we're glowing. Now when doing the sides, they're a little bit trickier. I make sure both sides are clean, and this time, instead of doing one at a time, I just cleaned both sides to have it all done and taken care of, and I can move right into installing the strips. Underneath my car on the side, there's not one long flat piece, so there's some extruding plastic I have to wrap it over top, but there was no issue and it felt like it was solidly attached to the car. It's pretty much smooth sailing so far, so now I have to take off the other shroud on the other side to get access to that fender wall, and now it's time to start routing the cable extensions to each strip. Again, you want to remove pop clips to pull the fender liner out, and you'll be able to get access to each side, and you'll be able to route the wire and pull it through to attach it to each strip. When you've got those cable extensions attached to both the front and the side LED strips, you'll push it all back up in the fender well and just reattach everything with the pop clips and make sure everything is put back into place. Make sure your cabling is neat and tidy by pulling them back up through the fender well and zip tying them into a hidden area. Trim the excess of the zip tie, and now it's time to move on to doing some cable management for the controller to make sure that is out of the way. I remove any slack underneath for the front LEDs where the Y connector connects to them by zip tying them to pieces of plastic underneath the bumper. Then you can pull up the wire and remove all the slack and start bunching up all of that excess wire and zip tying it together. Now, you absolutely could cut all this wiring and then heat wrap and shrink it so that way it's not as long, but for now I'm just going to zip tie it and move it out of the way. The wires that are red and black are much thicker and it's going to require a much larger and industrial size zip tie. I shove all the zip ties wires down into the engine bay and they're out of sight. Now that all the wires are out of the way, the last thing is to mount the controller. So I use double-sided 3M tape, cut it to length, pulled it off, and for now I'm attaching it to the battery, but I'm sure I'll move it at a later date. The rear is the last section to get wired up. I decided instead of going under the car to go through the wheel wells. I lift up one side of the car and remove the wheels to make routing the wires easier. To pull back the liner, I remove a few pop clips, and now I can pull out the liner just enough to get the wire routed through. Then I connect up all the wires and slowly add the wire up through the wheel well. I had to do this a couple times because the wire kept falling out, but once you get it set, it doesn't move. And of course, I forgot to remove the pop clips on the rear side, so I popped those out and then finished routing the wire all the way through. And then once I have both sides done doing this same process, I'm good to install the rear LED lights. I get the tires put back on, I tighten them down to spec, and lower the car back down. Since there's not much to mount the LEDs in the rear, I use some painter's tape to do a test to see how the lights look in certain areas to make sure the LEDs fill the entire rear with glow. And then I back the car up in the garage, close the garage, and they look great. So the positioning is perfect, and now it's time to clean everything up. There wasn't much to mount the LEDs to, so I mounted mine to the extruding spare wheel area underneath and a small metal area above each exhaust outlet. This meant that some of the strip was just floating and not attached to anything, but the adhesive overall felt really strong, so I'm not worried about it coming off. And that's it for this install. It was extremely easy to put them on. I did notice that you could see it peek through the front of the front lip, and you can also see them on the way I mounted them to the back. I didn't notice that when I was putting them on, but now that I do, I'll make a couple adjustments and make sure you cannot see them. The app is easy to use, and there's hundreds of different modes that you can choose from. One thing I do want to do is actually custom integrate these with the alarm, so when I lock the car and unlock the car, they work in sequence with the lights. Don't know if it's possible, but for now, thank you for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications.